Hello, and welcome to your new topic. So, we are looking at the Cold War. This is an introduction lesson which looks at what was the Cold War, and our learning objectives are below on the screen. So, we're going to understand the difference between a hot war and a cold war, and also understand some of the features of a Cold War. So, you will have a quiz to complete at the end of this lesson. It's in Google Classroom. Don't attempt the quiz until you've gone through this lesson. And any questions you've got, contact me, gbrown@stopseyhighschool.co.uk. So what's the difference, first of all, between a hot war and a cold war? Well, a hot war is when actual fighting takes place. So there's actual combat, there's actual conflict. And they are most of the battles that you would have studied throughout history and a few that I've chucked in. Well, a cold war is when war is waged against an enemy using every means short of actually fighting them. So in this case, we've got the Cold War between the USA and Russia, or the USSR. Now, they never actually fought each other physically, but they used several other tactics to fight each other. And that's what we're going to look at in today's lesson. So from 1945 to 1991, there was a Cold War between the capitalist USA, the West, as shown in this map in blue, and the communist USSR or Russia, or the East, shown in red on this map. You can see it spread all across Europe and beyond. So let's try and understand, first of all, why these two sides would not get on with each other. And the key difference is they have two different ways of life. You've studied this in your Russia topic already, that communism and capitalism are basically opposite ways of understanding how people should live their lives. I've taken just three things here: politics, economy, and beliefs. Let's see why they're so different. So, the communist politics, you should remember, there's only one political party, the Communist Party. And you're unable to change government. You are stuck with the Communist Party, and in that way it's a dictatorship. Whereas capitalism in the West, you have got several political parties, and people may choose and change their governments and given the opportunity to vote. What about the economy? Well, under a communist government, there is no private business. You cannot run your own business. There is no private profit. You cannot become very rich. And all industry and businesses are owned by the state for the benefit of everyone. So everyone is treated the same. There's no real opportunity for you to make more money. That's communism. Whereas capitalism in the West, most of the industry, most of the factories, most of the businesses are privately owned. And as a result, you have got extreme wealth and poverty in society. Some people who own successful businesses are very rich, whereas many people are quite poor. And what about beliefs? Well, communism, the main belief is that everyone is equal, although you could argue some are more equal than others in the Communist Party, and there is a censorship of the media. You're not allowed to criticise the government because it's working for the benefit of everyone. Whereas the capitalism, as we've just said, some will be wealthier than others, but there's very little censorship of the media. Newspapers, TV stations, radio, they can say what they like about the government, whereas you cannot do that in a communist system. So hopefully this shows that there's a huge difference between the capitalist way of life and the communist way of life. And this is why the war began. So what does a Cold War involve? Well, there's a few features that I'll go through now. And the first one is spying. Both sides spied on each other, looking mainly for military development, so new missile bases being built, for example. What new weapons were there? Now, spy planes were used that could fly at great height and take photographs. This is shown here with the U-2 spy plane. Now, the Soviets had better spies, I would argue. The American spies would just use middle-aged males normally, whereas the Soviets would use any type of person, including women, for spying. Now, the Soviets took advantage of people in Britain who wanted an Eastern way of life. Not everyone in Britain wanted to have a capitalist way of life. There were people who felt the communist way was better and it was fairer, especially after the war. So there were people who passed on documents to the USSR in the British government. There were a few spies. Now, the best example of this is pictured here, the Cambridge Five. These were members of the British government who passed on information to the communists because they felt communism was the better form of government. And no one suspected them for a very long time. In fact, the KGB, the Russian secret police, they thought that the Cambridge Five were a hoax because of the quality of information they were passing on. And just give an example of how far this went in, you've got one of them, Anthony Blunt, pictured here, was the Queen's art advisor, the Queen's curator. What else did it involve? Well, propaganda was another big part. Both sides used propaganda to create the worst possible image of the other. And this would mean that people would support the government in the Cold War. Now, this propaganda could be seen in newspapers, it could be seen in sports, and even film. I've pictured this one here. This is probably my favourite one. Rocky IV, fantastic film, was made in the 80s when the Cold War was really at its height. And never seen it before. It's worth a watch just to show how the Americans tried to portray themselves much better than the Russians, both sporting-wise and morally as well. Excellent film. Go and watch it. So what else does it involve? Well, it involves something called the arms race. And this is a competition in developing better weapons and faster ways of delivering them by the other side. So arms means weapons, it means armaments, and the race part involves making better weapons than the other side. So you're a bigger threat. Faster ways of delivering them. If you remember when you looked at the atomic bomb, that was delivered by plane. It took a number of hours to get to Japan and back. They were looking for new ways of developing and delivering missiles. And by the 1960s, both sides had enough nuclear weapons to destroy the other side many times over. Now, this sounds like it was threatening, and it was, and billions of pounds were spent on this. But at the same time, it stopped anyone firing a nuclear missile, because they knew if they pressed a button and sent nuclear missiles over to the enemy would realise this, they would detect the missiles coming over, and they would fire their missiles back. So if you pressed the button, you were effectively not just destroying the enemy, but destroying yourself at the same time. This was called the MAD theory, or mutually assured destruction. Mutually, both assured, it will happen, destruction, death, both of you will die if you fire any missiles. However, this did not stop both sides from continuing to spend billions each year to research even more deadly weapons. What else did involve the space race? So exploring space became a competition between the East and West as well. Being the first in space would show that you were more technologically and scientifically advanced than the other side. And it would show a way of promoting your way of life. So, for example, if Russia were able to send a satellite into space, first of all, it would show that communism was the best way forward, scientifically and technologically as well. And it was used as propaganda that they were stronger than the other. Now, the space race is interesting. Let's just have a look at a few examples here. So, the first real advance in space race in 1957, when Sputnik, clearly a Russian name, is sent up. It's a satellite. It's about the same size as a beach ball. Very light, and it was sent up into space. So 1-0 to Russia there. Next, in 1961, Yuri Gagarin became the first man into space. Again, clearly a Russian name, 2-0 to Russia. And one that you'll probably remember, 1969, Neil Armstrong, Buzz Aldrin and Michael Collins became the first people to land on the moon. So it showed some credibility there to the USA. They were really under pressure to win this one and get the first person on the moon. And again, billions were spent on the space race. What else did it involve? Well, loans and aid as well, more money being spent by these countries. Each side competed to provide loans and aid to less developed states to get their support as allies. So if you remember, after World War II, a lot of countries were completely destroyed. They had very little money. America had lots of money still. Russia had some, not as much. And they basically said, we'll help you rebuild, we'll give you money, but you've got to be an ally for us. You've got to be on our side. You've got to be capitalist, or you've got to be communist. So, why these two countries? Well, by 1945, they were the only superpowers left in the world. What is a superpower? Well, it means, first of all, you are an incredibly powerful country. And how do we judge that? First of all, you've got to have an incredibly large geographical size. You cannot be a superpower if you're just a tiny little Hawaiian island, for example. You've got to have a large population. You cannot be a superpower if there's just 20 people in your country. You've got to have a strong economy. You've got to have lots of money available. And you've got to have a wide range of weapons, up-to-date modern weapons compared to other countries. You cannot be a superpower if you are just hitting people with a bit of wood with a nail in, for example. Okay, you've got to have these powerful nuclear weapons ready. Now, America and Russia were the only countries that really fit the bill here for these ones, and so they were seen as superpowers afterwards. All other nations had been severely weakened by World War II. Britain, you could argue, would have been seen as a superpower, definitely in the 1900s, but we'd been damaged by the war so much financially that we just dropped off. We were no longer seen as a superpower. So when we look at the Cold War, it's between America and Russia. And that is it for your introduction lesson. So like I said, there is a quiz for you to complete in Google Classrooms now. Please go ahead and do so. Read the questions carefully. You only get one chance at it. Any questions you might have, feel free to contact me, gbrown@stopsyhighschool.co.uk. And all that remains for me to say is please look after yourselves, get some fresh air and exercise where you can, and I will see you soon. Take care and all the best. Bye-bye.